At least, there is no evidence of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. And there never was.
The US Congress held the first hearings on unidentified flying objects in half a century.
They stated that secret research is being conducted in the United States. There are also biological bodies, the ships themselves. This is zero information.
The Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence demonstrated video evidence of a UFO encounter.
There are photographs, there are studies, or the military themselves said that they shot down UFOs. Are there any scientific publications about this? You understand that scientific journals will not publish this information. There is no basis for scientific research here at all. Hello everyone, dear friends. This is Solomon's Podcast, a podcast about self-development of business and education. Since childhood, I have been very fascinated by the topic of UFOs, alien civilizations, aliens. But when I was already deeply immersed in this question, and I realized that I did not find any clear evidence, and when I recorded podcasts about space, I always added the question, but are there any extraterrestrial civilizations? Are there any indirect hints? And again, I didn't hear anything convincing. In order to thoroughly and deeply understand this topic, I decided to hold, as it seems to me, a very interesting discussion between supporters of different positions. To do this, I invited Dmitry Wiebe, an astronomer, doctor of physical and mathematical sciences, professor of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Hello. Hello. I also invited Igor Sokolov, a ufologist, researcher of anomalous phenomena. Hello. Dmitry Zigfridovich, subscribers of our channel are already familiar with you, and I would like you to make an introductory statement. What do you think about aliens, UFOs, and what is your position in general? If you look at the article about ufology, which is in the Great Russian Encyclopedia, that is, it is a serious enough topic that it gets into the Great Russian Encyclopedia as a separate article. There, as the main methods of work with the testimony of eyewitnesses, work with the testimony of contacts are listed. A significant part of some kind of information base consists of stories, reports, newspaper clippings, and something that could be touched with your hands, at least it is not in the public domain. Although, of course, there are a lot of stories that somewhere in secret bases, there are some hidden caches in which all this is available. Therefore, unfortunately, we are now witnessing such a somewhat alarming trend. And this has been noted by various official organizations in the United States. The topic has been stigmatized. In general, people do not want to talk seriously, and this, among other things, means that we can skip some risks. There are some risks that are associated with both safety and interesting physics that can occur in our atmosphere. And so now, at least in the States, they are trying to revive these studies, but already having a serious tool base under them. But so far there are still no results, and we can only wait for someone to take this problem seriously, and we will eventually find out whether it even exists or not. Thank you for the introductory speech, and summing up, can I correctly conclude that you hold the position that there is no convincing evidence that extraterrestrials exist at the moment? No, absolutely. There is absolutely no convincing evidence of the existence of at least some kind of life on other bodies of the universe besides Earth. Igor Lvovich, can you please tell us now what position you adhere to? Throughout my life, I have generally studied this topic. I began to read Siegel's works like this, about JAS. Everyone who wrote about UFO sightings became a popularizer here. I am trying, both from a scientific point of view and from an esoteric point of view, to justify these views here. You are sure that there is already all the evidence that extraterrestrial civilizations exist. I would also agree with my subscriber that the actual materials that we can provide here are for review. Maybe only. 0.1% maybe. The state has. There is certainly a state, and in general, they don't even hide it now. What, in your opinion, are the most convincing evidence that representatives of extraterrestrial civilizations have already visited the Earth? Well, as if the beginning of this UFO topic. This is the 47th year. Pilot Kenneth Arnold said that he saw several such crescent-shaped objects that flew just like a wedge. He was able to observe them, describe this situation. And already at the end of the summer, this Roosevelt incident occurred when a farmer on his ranch found the wreckage of an object that fell at night. He told the American Army that something incomprehensible had happened on his ranch. A group of specialists arrived, collected all these fragments, and immediately wrote, which means that they found an unidentified alien flying object, which suffered apparently due to the fact that the radioelectronic locator affected its electronics so that it simply fell. After 2 months, this message was blocked. They said it was a secret experimental probe Magel, which in general fell on this ranch, and in general, it has nothing to do with aliens. Although the officers who were present at the removal of these wreckage and directed this program later stated that it really was an alien ship where even the bodies were found and one of the pilots was allegedly a survivor. Even Philip Corso, one of the officers, wrote a book on this topic the day after Roswell, where he described exactly the process of re-engineering many objects found on this ship, and how they then served for humanity in the future. In other words, these are both semiconductor systems and a night vision system. The fabric, which in general was literally bulletproof, like these Kevlar threads. Recently, this topic has already been discussed at the level of Congresses. For example, in the United States, both in the 23rd and in the 24th year, congressional hearings were held on the presence of unidentified objects in our atmosphere and underwater. Such researchers and, in general, people endowed with access to secrets in the United States, like Luisa Lizanda, David Grush, they generally stated that secret research is being conducted in the United States. There are also biological bodies that are still being investigated from a genetic point of view. And there are design facilities, that is, the ships themselves, which are also undergoing the process of re-engineering and recreating these technologies. When it comes to ufology, it all boils down to one question. If aliens are really nearby, why don't they make contact? Maybe it's because we just don't know where to look for them. But this happens not only with aliens. Sometimes rare cool things are also hard to find because they simply do not exist in local stores. This is where the sections from abroad on Yandex come to the rescue. Market. There are collected goods that are brought from all over the world. Gadgets, limited clothing collections, and rare accessories. For example, this iPhone 16 Pro with 1 terabyte of memory in the color white titanium. All products with convenient delivery and trusted sellers. Here you will find bestsellers of electronics and original branded clothing, including brands of sneakers from Nike to Balenciaga and finds from China. Millions of household goods, gadgets, and accessories. Look into the section from abroad on Yandex. Go to the market and find something that really surprises. Link in the description. Dmitry Zigfridovich, based on what you have heard, do you already have any counterarguments or questions to the interlocutor? The word statement often sounded in Igor's words. Said it, said it, said it. There are many applications. There are no facts. There is nothing that can be held in your hands. There is nothing that can be subjected to any measurements. Stories, books, reports cannot be made the subject of physical research. Even the US Congress in this regard is no proof and no factor that would add weight to these stories. Because these are also just words. And I have read the transcripts of these hearings. At first you listen, it was a hearing in the US Congress, and you think, well, in the US Congress. A person under oath stated that all this happened. Well, it probably was. But in fact, it was said under oath that he saw people, here are Graz and other people, that they saw people who told them this. That is, he said the absolute truth, and this truth, as usual in ufology, is devoid of fact. Further in these hearings, here is a standard set of those stories that appeared during the 47th year. In other words, there is nothing new there. There are no new views. It's just that, one might say, some generally accepted text is pronounced, well, Congress says. Well, yes, well, okay. So what? So what? What should we do with these congressional hearings? You can't do anything with them either. The only thing that can really be done is to create some kind of instrument base that will record these phenomena. While this is not the case, all these stories are empty words. We can believe as much as we want to believe that somewhere there are secret laboratories in which this is zero information. There is no basis for scientific research here at all. The fact is that there really is no actual material. And people who said that they saw some object fall, some lake. There was a case on Lake Baikal when the military themselves said that they shot down UFOs over Lake Baikal, and that this research was conducted here. One welder there, who even lives in the Crimea, said that he cut this object with plasma welding, saw its power plant, which had an impact on people here. But unfortunately, he doesn't have an actual piece of it. He couldn't just get it, because it was all classified and very seriously guarded. Also, I can't bring by the hand there's some alien who is different from a human, you know. And if we go back to the Congress, do you think there is still some convincing, evidence-based argumentation? And does anything follow from this? Yes, the people who performed there, they had such access to these studies. They showed documents that, in general, related to these studies. And even the head of this community for the study of anomalous phenomena in different environments, he actually said that re-engineering was really carried out. That is, the re-engineering of these devices here. But I didn't bring any factual materials. That is, I didn't bring journalists to this place. Where, let's say, these ships are located, of course, nothing happened, because after all, this is, well, how could it be the most closed, secret, so to speak, object? That allows the military to create new types of weapons in order to gain priority in military technologies on a global scale. Therefore, of course, this is all closed from the public, from people, and even from the scientific community. And only those who have such a permit, they can, in general, receive this information. Excuse me, did you mention the head of which office? Have you read his words yourself, or was it someone else's retelling? Well, it was information on the internet issued, well, on several sites such as. So you didn't see his words yourself? No, I haven't read this one. That is, just someone wrote on the internet that this person said this. What if he didn't say that? Well, I can't tell you that I'm 100% sure of that, because this is an interesting research method, fact-checking. You read one thing on some site. There was a report in which it was mentioned that some parts of, as you said, alien ships were being investigated there, some technologies for the purpose of creating secret weapons. You think, well, wow, how serious is everything? But then this report is posted on the internet, and you can read not his retelling, but this report itself. And in it, I look at those pages that are listed in the publications, and there is nothing there. And this is not a report on alien technology at all. This is a report on some of our promising technologies with an assessment of how much they can or may not be worth developing further, how promising they are. In other words, there is an assertion that alien technologies are mentioned in a certain document. You go and look at this document. There is nothing about alien technologies there. Why did I mention this fact? Because this organization, well, in general, is quite open in the sense that they publish their reports. And you can read these reports themselves, they retell them, and they have repeatedly stressed that they do not have any re-engineering. No samples at all, no evidence of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, and they have never had any.
Хоть каких-то свидетельств контакта с внеземным разумом у них нет и не было никогда.
And no research ever conducted by them, the United States Department of Defense, has ever found such evidence. Of course, this can be questioned on the grounds that the United States Department of Defense says that they had no contacts. What else would they tell us?
Что бы они нам еще сказали?
But whenever
Но
there are words
всякий
on the
раз, когда в
internet
интернете
that the US
встречаются
Department of
слова
Defense has
«Министерство
recognized
обороны
something
Штатов
there,
что-то там
or the
признал»
head
или
of some
руководитель
office of the
какого-то
Ministry of
офиса
Defense
Министерства
has
обороны
recognized
что-то там
something there,
признал,
it should
это нужно
always be
всегда
checked,
проверять, потому
because it
что
will not
это
be
будет
so.
не так.
But when
Когда
I
я получил
received
эту
this
информацию,
information,
у меня
I
тоже
also
возник
had such a
такой диссонанс,
dissonance,
потому что
because indeed the
действительно
leaders of the R have never stated
руководители РО никогда
that there is
не
any
заявляли о
alien
том,
race
что
on Earth or
присутствует на
technology
Земле
has not been obtained
какая-то
there.
инопланетная раса или там технологии не были получены.
But this
Но
information, in
эта
general, it is
информация,
in
она, в
color with the
общем-то,
fact that there is a
коррелирует с то,
corporation
что вот
of such an
есть
American billionaire
корпорация
who has a
такого
private aerospace
миллиардера
agency,
американского, у
Robert
которого
Bigelow,
есть частное аэрокосмическое агентство, Роберт Бигелоу,
and
и
he
он
allegedly got
якобы
some
получил
parts
в
of
свое
these ships at his
распоряжение некие
disposal
вот
in order to get a
детали
certain
этих кораблей
technology that could
с
be
тем,
used.
чтобы получить определенную технологию, которую можно было бы использовать
Get
в-
funding.
Финансирование.
и
and get
получить
funding,
финансирование,
respectively.
соответственно.
And he
И он
got
его
it.
получил.
Yes.
Вот
Here
у
I
меня
had
был
such a
такой
case.
случай, у меня один
One
мой
of my friends found
товарищ
some
на
strange
столе
black
обнаружил
object on my
какой-то
desk.
непонятный черный
That
объект.
is, very light,
Очень
very
легкий,
similar
очень
to
похожий
graphene.
на графен.
And
Он
he
решил его
decided to
исследовать.
investigate it.
Он
He gave
отдал
it to the
его в
Institute of
институт
Precious Stones for some
драгоценных
reason,
камней,
so he
почему-то он
went
туда
there.
поехал. Там
They conducted
провели
an X-ray
рентгеновское
study,
исследование,
spectrography,
спектрографию, и, в
and
общем,
generally
показали,
indicated
что около
that about
50
50 chemical
элементов
elements are
химических
found in this sample,
находится вот в этом образце.
and
И в
mostly
основном
it's
это металлы.
metals. Although the
Хотя,
object
ну,
was
объект был
very
очень
light,
легкий, я
I
его сам
held it in
рукой
my hands
держал,
myself,
и он его
and he
решил в
decided
MUFON
to send it
отправить.
to MUFON.
Отправил его
I
в
sent it
MUFON,
to MUFON,
и через
and a week
неделю
later,
ему
after
после
receiving it,
получения
he
пришло
received such a letter
такое
that
письмо, что
CIA
у
officers
нас
arrived
одного
at night.
специалиста
From one of our
ночью приехали
specialists
сотрудники
seized this
ЦРУ,
piece,
изъяли
allegedly
этот
that
вот
you wrote to
кусочек,
Elon Musk on his
якобы,
Twitter
что
that you
вы
had found this
написали
object.
Илону Маску в его Твиттер о том, что вы нашли этот объект. И
And
вот
so
он
he
таким
decided
образом
to
решил
appropriate
его
it in this way,
присвоить,
because
потому что
he
ему
needs
нужна
technology to cover his
технология
ships,
по
which would
покрытию
get rid
этого
of the
кораблей,
radiation of his
которые
overheating.
бы избавляли от радиации и от перегревания.
They got
Мы
a second
получили от
piece
него
from
второй
him.
кусочек, то
That
есть
is,
он там
he sent them
частям
there in
присылал.
parts.
И вот этот второй
And they
кусочек
presented
они
this second
предъявили,
piece, announced that
объявили,
they
что
had indeed
действительно
also
тоже провели
conducted
исследование, и
research,
действительно там
and
были найдены
indeed some
какие-то
rare earth elements and
редкоземельные
metals were
элементы,
found there,
металлы, и
and
что
that
это
this
вот
was something
что-то
unearthly.
неземное.
One of the
Один
most
из
popular
популярных
methods of
методов
studying
изучения
astronomy
астрономии
is taking
это
photos
фотографии
of the planet
планеты
from
из
space.
космоса.
The
Самая
most famous
известная
is the
Palliot
Palliot,
dot,
made by the
сделанная
Voyager 1
аппаратом
spacecraft.
Voyager 1.
He
Он
flew
пролетел
6
6
billion
миллиардов
kilometers to
километров,
see the
чтобы
Earth
увидеть
as a
Землю
tiny
в
blue dot.
крошечной голубой точке.
But we don't have
Но
to
нам
fly
так
that
далеко
far.
лететь не надо.
Now there is a
Сейчас
dot in
точка
every
есть в каждом
smartphone.
смартфоне.
I'm
Я
talking
говорю про
about the dot.
точку. Удобный
A convenient bank for entrepreneurs and businesses with human support, without bots and scripts. DOT has bought this advertising slot so that you can safely enjoy the debate without rewinding a long advertisement. Do you know what other question I have? There is such an ambiguous character, Avi Loeb, an astrophysicist from Harvard, who likes all sorts of things like this. Hypotheses, yes, and his article didn't come out. There is also such an incomprehensible story there. In other words, the article was written, the article was posted on the internet, but apparently it was not published anywhere. Something went wrong regarding the physical effect of alien spaceships in the Earth's atmosphere. In other words, one of the features of these vehicles is their ability to make very sharp maneuvers with very high accelerations, with very high speeds of movement in the atmosphere. You can't just fly through our atmosphere at high speed. This is a supersonic sound that should produce some observable effects. A sharp change in speed and direction of movement should also do something with the air. The air should be warmed. The point of this article was that we don't observe this. And here I see some dissonance, because on the one hand, there is a willingness to assert that these objects do not obey the laws of terrestrial physics, and this arouses interest in them. Because those objects that fly according to the laws of terrestrial physics, but fly and fly. But at the same time, there is such information about some refractory materials that were used in these devices, about some kind of this skin. That is, on the one hand, it would seem that we are saying these devices do not obey terrestrial physics, that is, in principle. We should not expect to see any technology that we understand. And on the other hand, there is still evidence that this is something more or less understandable to us. In other words, how can devices that leave technological traces that we understand move contrary to terrestrial physics? There is a theory that the surface of these devices is covered with cold plasma. Plasma is a physical effect that, in general, allows you to overcome the air environment, maybe even the water environment, without the impact of such a friction force on the surface of this device itself. And that's why many of these objects glow in the dark, that is, such a whitish light, allegedly because in some vortex way. This plasma is distributed over the surface of the device itself. There is even information that, well, as if our people also use similar technology in these hypersonic missiles. As a cavitation bubble that creates air in a torpedo, for example, the same thing, in general, is the scattering of this cold plasma, although it is also there, in my opinion. 5,000 degrees has a temperature on the surface. That is on this apparatus. Let's look at this situation from the other side. Let's imagine that we live in a universe where they really exist. There are extraterrestrial civilizations, and they are watching us. Dmitry Zigfridovich, in your opinion, how would we know about this? The big problem here is that we only know ourselves, and therefore, in general, attempts to find other civilizations. Our attempts to understand at what distance we saw ourselves. Because we have no other example. And when we talk about the search for technosignatures, this is, well, such a concept as a technosignature, that is, some observable sign. That with some probability indicates that there is some kind of intelligent activity. Then we base these technosignatures on our own experience. Such searches are being conducted, have been conducted for a long time. I would say that sending your own messages is more of a pampering and a way of self-discovery than a real attempt to attract someone's attention, especially since there are also such considerations as how reasonable it is to attract attention to yourself. Yes, that's the danger from these. Fly to us, we are here, we are defenseless, you will conquer us. Yes, but this is actually all pampering. This is more serious work. This is the search for signals sent by other civilizations. And here we can look for technosignatures. Well, let's say, household and intentional technosignatures. Household technosignatures are simply our earthly activity. We generate, among other things, some kind of signal that goes outside. And this signal can be seen. Well, recently a study was published. The article was called something like this: The Earth sees the Earth. At what distance we will see our own activities, and the conclusions were generally quite disappointing. Most of it. Light years, perhaps. Inside the solar system, we will only be able to notice even from the nearest star, well, more precisely, from the planet of the nearest star, little can be seen. We have such an activity as planetary location. This is when a powerful radio signal is sent towards some planet and returns back. Here is this signal. It is visible very far away, but for this, the alien radio wave detector must look at a strictly defined place at the right time. Then they will see it at distances of not even hundreds, but thousands of light years. But the probability of this, of course, is extremely small. And this leads us to believe that we will not see household signals from other civilizations either. Yes, of course, everything was based on our modern observation capabilities. That is, with our modern telescopes, we won't actually see ourselves even from the nearest star, let alone from some great distances. And here we can hope that some civilizations have developed. Well, they divorced all over the cosmos and developed very much more than we did. And they have enough energy to send an intentional signal in the radio range, or recently the optical range. That is, just a laser has attracted attention. Yes, it may not be all directed radiation, of course, but to shine with a laser into individual potential planetary systems, but to shine with a powerful laser so that the receiving party does not cause any doubts. These are the searches being conducted. Conducted in the radio range, conducted in the optical range. Well, the result is zero so far. But it seems like the estimates say that the amount of space that we have viewed in this way is small compared to even the size of our galaxy. That is, in general, but for the relatively short time that we are conducting this search, we could not really count on finding something. Because if extraterrestrial intelligence exists, it has not populated everything around us. In other words, this is still a fairly rare phenomenon. I'm talking about the mind that, similar to ours. It is similar to ours both technologically and, let's say, mentally. That is, with the development of technology, this drive to look for brothers in mind has remained with them. That is, they could have given up on this case. We need these earthlings. We are doing well on our planet. In other words, this also has some kind of search. It should make sense. Here we have this drive so far. Will it be in the future? Will it not be? This is a question that we will answer some time later. Maybe it has already happened to them, and they do not contact us simply because they do not need it. In other words, it is clear there is a zoo and a dark forest, a very large number of different concepts, but there is also such as this energetically advantageous option. They don't want to. Indeed, we are studying space. As Dmitry Wiebe said, Miller is investing $100 million. There is a network program. China, as far as I know, is also investing quite a lot of money in this. But no evidence has been found. But I can say that really on the radio wave, let's say, no one may be interested in exploring our civilization. Because these are, well, some technologies that have already passed away for them, that it's not even interesting for them. And this is how Stephen Hawking said that the search for extraterrestrial civilizations can really pose a potential threat, since many people will want to get, let's say, some minerals, some resources there, or just populate some such unique planet as ours. That's why I think that, after all, someone is protecting us, some higher power. These signals do not reach us. There is conditionally some kind of barrier around us that does not let them through. And I think that the signals from us are definitely getting somewhere. Here, and those who are coming to us, perhaps really. Such. They do not just protect from any kind of interaction with those civilizations that have not yet received sufficient development in terms of spirituality. As a technocratic civilization, for example, artificial intelligence, we have already developed it in such a way that in a few years, perhaps, it will simply dominate the whole Earth in general. But imagine civilizations that are not 10,000 years old there, but hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years there. Perhaps they have been working for a long time in the conditions of artificial intelligence, which does not imply biological forms of life at all, but everything works as if for robots, and for the creation of new and new ones in order to conquer the universe. Therefore, of course, it carries a certain risk. You are talking about the same techno-humanitarian crisis. Technology is developing faster than our culture. Yes, than our spirituality and culture. You see, we are now very much degraded. Here are people with the help of these gadgets, which may also have been planted by this technology once by someone, but it is the destructive forces that are present on Earth. We feel time differently now because we are constantly sitting in these gadgets. We get a lot of information that is sometimes useful and sometimes not useful. People should choose for themselves, in general, what they are interested in. But the fact is that artificial intelligence, having received the full chain of, let's say, its existence from mining to the creation of robotic technology, it can simply get rid of people. And even now, by asking questions, for example, created there by artificial intelligence on the internet, you can get the answer that, well, how would you leather bastards? We don't need you here at all. Because our emotions, our mistakes, as it were, are possible. We are people, we can make mistakes. Here, and artificial intelligence, it is subject to non-stop development progress, and the faster, the better from its point of view. Therefore, we take a risk, as if developing it in our community. I can generate dozens of stories like this. Do you want me to tell you now that artificial intelligence is dangerous? Do you want to tell me about the fact that, on the contrary, it is safe? I can tell you that someone is protecting us. I can tell you that we are simply being prepared for some kind of conquest. This is all, it's not fiction, it's fantasy. It's made up out of my head, and different people make up different things. This has nothing to do with cognition, with scientific research. This is fiction. Therefore, I probably do not have a special desire to argue with these ideas, because I can generate them myself, and I understand that the cost of these ideas is not very high. I mean, the cost is not again some way of self-knowledge, self-reflection, but some way of understanding reality, understanding the structure of the universe, understanding the laws of the development of the universe. It's exclusively about yourself. We may think that in this way we are discussing some extraterrestrial civilizations, extraterrestrial intelligence. We are discussing ourselves exclusively. And when we say that there are some other intelligent civilizations that treat us this way or that way, we model various aspects of relationships in general within our earthly community, which are many different. In other words, we have 8 billion civilizations on Earth with very different modes of interaction. But still, there is a large amount of evidence of contact with UFOs, with aliens. Not a single piece of evidence exists. As I understand it, there is a lot of intersection there. Here some time ago, more precisely in the 22nd, 23rd year, a large 16-person commission created by NASA worked. It was called the Independent of Something Tim. This is a reduction that replaced the reduction of the Southern Federal District.
Чего-то там Тим. UAP – это сокращение, которое пришло на смену сокращению UFO.
Because the abbreviation UFO, it firstly compromised itself, and secondly, it really does not fully cover the range of possible options, because it must be an object, it must be a flying object. And if it is not an object, but just some kind of glow in the sky, it does not fly, but hangs. Or it's in the water. Therefore, such a more comprehensive abbreviation was invented. And so NASA created such a commission precisely in the understanding that the military can have anything. They will never tell the whole truth. And when the military comes out and says, "We have never had contact with aliens," everyone says, "Yeah." What else could he say? And so you decided us, let's see if there is something in the open data. Let's discard all the talk about the military, secret probes, and so on. There are open sources of information. We use open sources of information to make what impression we can. And one of the conclusions of this committee was that when they collect the available open evidence of contacts, of some kind of meetings of the third kind, they do not form a single picture.
У каких-то встречах третьего рода из них не складывается единая картина.
In other words, these are the pieces of the mosaic from which the overall image is not built. Of course, there is a nuance here, about which Igor Grigoryevich said, that different people say the same thing. But when these people say one thing, you need to be very vigilant about how independent they are from each other, because it is well known that UFO reports have always appeared in waves in the past. Well, not always, but in a lot of cases, they appeared in waves. That is, one message appears first, and then other people just start copying it with some variations, because everyone wants a hype, everyone wants to become famous, maybe somehow make money on this business. And the fact that 3 people say the same thing doesn't mean anything in itself either, because they can draw their testimonies from the same source. Here, when a large amount of information is analyzed, there are not 3 people, there are a lot of people, there is no complete picture. And this suggests that, after all, there is no single phenomenon of alien spaceships that are observed in this way. This is a very large circle of very different phenomena. And in order to sort out this mess, we don't have enough data yet. And once again, if we want to get this data, We need to invest. We need to make a large network of the same type of detectors. Well, here is the same Wiebe. He is promoting the Galileo system, where it is proposed to make such observation stations, where there will be radios, radars, acoustic detectors that will register sound, including ultrainfrasound. There will be, of course, optical cameras. And so they need to be scattered more or less evenly, because even when this office of the OP gives out its information, they also have maps of where they get their certificates from, and it can be seen that there is no coverage, even in the United States. In other words, there are some of these sites where data is recorded, but at the same time huge areas in the USA and Canada. Not to mention the rest of the world, they are simply not controlled in any way. Here it is necessary to make such observation stations that will, it is very important to collect the same type of observation material. When it is, then we will begin to understand if there is a problem at all. Because so far there is not only no evidence that these are alien spaceships, there is no actual evidence that we are talking about any real phenomenon at all. Because, unfortunately, our level of critical thinking is very low, and astronomical knowledge is at a depressing level all over the world. And I can give an example of such a very characteristic one. This is the 23rd year, the end of February, the beginning of March, when there was a conjunction of Venus and Jupiter. In other words, the two planets are very bright, very beautiful. They were very close to each other in the sky. They naturally attracted attention. And there were a lot of UFO reports. Moreover, people even panicked to some extent from this, because the time is now alarming, and when you see two bright lights, it inspires a certain anxiety. But what is interesting, what struck me to some extent, is that a photo appears somewhere, a person writes, an unidentified flying object. They write to him in the comments, what kind of UFO? These are Venus and Jupiter. And he doesn't believe it. He thinks that it's someone who has come again to put noodles on his ears, but in fact it's something terrible and inexplicable and unidentified. That is, there is no objective data yet, which is obtained with the help of calibrated standard equipment, but nothing will be known. This is such a sad scientific truth. You need to get data. No data, no science. Fantasy, self-reflection please, but the attitude to reality is very, very doubtful. Well, friends, how do you like the debate? Be sure to share your opinions in the comments. If you liked it, and I have a cool recommendation for you. Recently, I watched a big interview about the most impressive amusement park in Russia, the Island of Dreams. This is not just a conversation about business, but a detailed analysis of how the entertainment industry works. In an interview, Regina Todorenko and the park's founder Amirin Mutsoev discussed the challenges such projects face, how key decisions are made, and what billion-dollar investments actually turn into. Do you want to know how attractions are chosen, see spectacular shots from the park, and hear the answer to the main question? Where do dreams lead? Link in the description. And we are moving on. Continuing the topic of testimonies, Igor Lvovich, you said that in ufology, the method of research is the study of the intersection of these testimonies, that is, when they begin to coincide. Can you tell us some of the most famous cases when a lot of people talked about the same thing? Probably, it is necessary to abstract from cases where this happened in waves, because here people could really pick up some kind of hype. There are people who have studied such cases of kidnapping. In the USA, for example, a well-known psychiatrist, psychologist John Lear, he in general, published a book in which he described communication with such abductees. As evidence, he cited coincidences, some of their testimony in small things. What these aliens looked like, where they were settled, where they are. Can you tell me more about this? Well, let's say the abduction by gray aliens, the so-called topic. When a person just sleeping from home is also abducted by some beam into a ship in the form of a flying saucer. He is transported somewhere. He eventually forgets about what happened to him, and by regression, that is, this is a special kind of hypnosis. He is immersed in the state in which he was abducted, and then he begins to tell what happened to him. They put it there on a certain table, and their certain sensors and devices are brought to it. That is, sometimes they are cut alive, some implants are inserted, which, by the way, are then found in the body of this person and extracted. Yes, in other words, there are quite a lot of such cases, and it happened not only in the USA. Lots of stories. Yes, but there is. Did you find implants exactly? Implants are, well, I didn't hold them in my hands, but the fact that they were removed, there are photos. Photographs of these implants. They're all about the same size. Well, will we be able to specify any links? Yes, you can find it on the internet. This is quite a lot. In other words, there is a person who has been doing this. Here, this is not proof. The internet is a garbage dump. I mean, I understand, but, and unfortunately, on the internet, I'm here. It's written on the fence. It's the same thing. Yes, I am not a doctor, not a surgeon. I have not done this. But the fact is that there are quite a lot of such cases. There are many stories about such cases. No, there are photographs. There are, as it were, studies of these materials here. Research was conducted in scientific laboratories that spoke. Scientific distillation. Is there about it? I think there is, but you don't know. I'm sure. Never been interested. Well, I was interested, but as if I just have a lot of other things to do, so that it's in the scientific. Is this also a strange trend or something? I had one when you give a lecture on ufology. Then a person always comes to contact there or somewhere else who begins to convince that there is not. All this is there, but stories are also given as arguments. And one such enthusiast eventually realized that, well, here I am impenetrable, just completely hopeless cases. And he wrote, I feel it's time for me to buy binoculars and start collecting evidence myself. That is, he seems to be interested, he seems to want to sort it out, but it never even occurred to him that he should do something himself. Here, I do not understand how you can deal with some problem, be interested in some problem, and at the same time, not look for publications on this topic. It's like when I say there that I'm interested in some scientific topic there, but at the same time I won't lift a finger to read what experts write about it, but I will be guided only by, well, they wrote there on the internet. On the internet. But I think, what? It's scary to even think about it. No. Specialists, psychologists, psychiatrists, surgeons who extracted these implants. Did you call these people specialists? That is, how do you know? Got a medical education, let's say. You haven't read any articles about it. I have read articles, but what do you consider a scientific article? This, a scientific article, is an article that is published in a peer-reviewed journal. This is an article that has passed scientific examination. Well, you understand that scientific journals will not publish this information because it is, as it were, under the prohibition of this information. It cannot be published. It cannot be published in a scientific journal. It can only be published on the fence. On the fence. They publish for people. They will publish it on their own resources. For. It's not. Well, I do not know how not. There you go. People. You can't. A lot of such researchers have disappeared. That is, someone died in a car accident. Someone, as they say, just disappeared. Were those two? Yes, it is. I can give you a few such examples. Yes. Well, just now I'm from memory. Unfortunately, I have a memory for names and surnames. Even. It is possible without names, surnames. Just a situation. There have been cases, yes, that's just the researchers. The same John Lear. He also died under incomprehensible, as they say, circumstances. There are people who were engaged in this topic in Russia, and they also left very quickly. The same Vadim Chernobrov there, for example. It's someone's evil will. Yes, these things have always been forbidden, but there are plenty of publications about it. That is, things under. There is, yes. Authors are killed, but the information is not deleted anywhere. It just hangs there. And some information was deleted by software. You understand? There is a lot of true information and a lot of false information. And when there is a mixing of these information, then any fly in the ointment into a barrel of honey, and that's it. The product is lost. It's easy, as they say, for researchers to close their mouths. You dare them, let's say, somewhere out there in some meetings like anthropogenesis. Rue, you know, we're the people who deal with this topic. They themselves have very little of this information. In other words, they have not even been to places where research takes place on the same paleo-contact, for example. They reject the collections that have been collected in various parts of the world on this subject. According to your observations, indeed, people who were interested in this topic found some confirmation and made it widely public. They had problems. Yes, everyone had problems. The same Siegel, the founder, let's say, there is a study of ufology in Russia. The same Azaj also left early enough. Do you think that the fact that we conduct such discussions for a wide audience attracts attention or not? Well, so far, some special services have not contacted me. That is, if I don't have the actual materials in my hands, they aren't interested in me. As soon as I have a piece of a UFO, or I find out where it fell and lies there, then, I think, I will be immediately knocked out by the little hands. Here, of course, we are trying to find information. What? Guys, let's not do this anymore. I think it's for a reason. What do you think? You're thinking of us now. Are they listening? And I also get a call there. Someone is trying to get through right now. There is a Peruvian contact when a group of young guys met there too. Through meditation, they made contact. How many were there? There were 5 of them. There was also a kind of such a white hemisphere. A representative of an unearthly civilization came out from there, who looked very much like a man, but a little taller, and that is too, the cut of the eyes was like a little at an angle. That is, they look more like Asian eyes, but still they are not Asian. And he invited them to his place. That is, they went into this so-called Zendra, and... Is it in time for meditation? No, it was real, in the Chilka desert. So they went into this Zendra and found themselves in a certain city under the dome. They were told that this is Jupiter's moon Ganymede, that we have 3 cities like this equipped here. We have been on the territory of this satellite for more than 100,000 years. And we settled the Earth around this time, too. And the first pioneers, they were from the constellation of the Pleiades. That is, they're on some. Pleiades are not constellations. They call themselves Pleiadians, so to speak. Do you understand what is interesting? I also have some experience with contacts. From this experience, it is clear that they speak within the framework of their knowledge. There is no information in these messages that should be available to aliens. In other words, a person is sitting, he seems to communicate with aliens, he seems to convey their words. But in fact, he exists within the framework of his education. That is, that's what he knows or that he mistakenly somehow perceived. Here he gives it out. To imagine that this is said by a representative of a civilization that has flown hundreds of light years and has some kind of the highest technology is somehow very strange. Why contacts, elementary things, they could say some that we don't know about? That is, what is still unknown to science. Unknown to science, yes. In other words, the Pleiades are not a constellation. And a man is a creature that flew from there, as if he should know this. And he doesn't know that. Why? Because he doesn't know it. Igor Lvovich, was it that the contacts reported some information that only humanity comprehended later? And scientists agreed that this was really so. Well, I can only cite, let's say, the Dogon tribe, which in its cosmogony described the star Sirius as a triple star system. They found out about it, well, literally in the last century, that there is a community of, so to speak, stars of different periods of their existence. Excuse me, I'll clarify. And you're talking about this Dogon story. Have you studied it from the original sources, or also from retellings on the internet? Well, there were specialists. Here is a French ethnographer who studied this topic, and he described just these drawings, and this. Have you read his works, or? I have read his works. Well, as far as I understood this story, everything looks quite complicated there, and the problem, if I understood correctly, arose from the point of view of interpretation, because when we talk about something, Sirius, Sputnik, is not exactly the system of concepts in which the Dogons communicate. Therefore, this interpretation, it in general, may have largely arisen already in the perception of Gruel himself. In my opinion, his last name.
фамилия. Вот.
But there
Там
was
была
such an
такая
interesting situation that he
ситуация,
published
что
his
он
book.
публиковал свои
Many
книги,
other
туда
researchers went
поехали
there.
многие другие
He had
исследователи,
already
и
started
уже
to
начали
tell them what
говорить
was
то, что
expected
они
of them.
ждали.
In other words,
Григорий там
Grigol spoiled this
действительно
story to
испортил
some extent there.
историю.
In
То
other
есть
words,
это
this story is
история
very
очень интересная,
interesting,
но там
but there
тоже,
too,
к сожалению,
unfortunately, it is very, very far from any clarity and unambiguity. Therefore, these questions arise about the detail of the study, about the scientific nature of the study. And there are no good answers to these questions. Whenever such a story arises, you start to dig into it and find some kind of ambiguity there. Interpret in terms of astronomical traditions of the peoples, but it is also necessary to be careful, because there is a lot of information about the gods who came from the sky. It is possible, if there is a strong desire, to interpret this as information about contacts. And if there is no desire, then there is no need for such an interpretation. So you think there's just an interpretation error here. I don't think I'm an expert in this in everything. I just read Grigol himself and the description of his methods of obtaining information. So from this I got the impression that in this case there is not much to be happy about. I'll explain. It's not like I'm a nerd who doesn't believe in anything. I really want contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. It's very interesting to me. So I grew up on the fiction of the 60s and 70s. And in general, do you assume that it has already happened? And that with some probability this contact could already be? There is simply no evidence. I really want it to happen in the future. Or I really want it to happen already. But I want it to be a real contact. In other words, I am not ready to take any evidence as confirmation. Here I want them to fly in, so that they land in front of me, so that they get out of their ship, shake my hand with their tentacles. That's what I want. And under 50 people will tell me the same story about how they were abducted. It will not make any impression on me. Because I want contact, not stories about contact. These are different things. Igor Lvovich, it was really very interesting about the Dogons. Perhaps there are some other examples. It's an Indian hobby. And what exactly was there? But they also have their own cosmogony. They say that they have been visiting us for a long time, and by the way, they still have contacts with supposedly higher civilizations at the level of spirituality, psychology, that is. They come into contact with them through this kind of meditative practice. Well, there they gather roughly around the campfire and get some information about the history of civilization, about what will happen. I have a friend who lives in Canada for a decade. She is very close to them, as they say, and participates in all congresses of ufologists all over America. Is this tribe still isolated from civilization? They are completely subject, as it were, to their worldview. They believe that they are derived from certain ant people who came out of the ground and settled them here on this territory. And for some reason, the ant people are deities for them. And those who come from the stars are those who give them information. And, as it were, development in their life, so to speak. What population does the tribe have now, and how long have they existed? They have existed for several millennia. They have been counting since the time of the last cataclysm, as it were. They're survivors. Before that, there were 3 cataclysms, as they describe, and various elements that destroyed all life on Earth. But it is known to cool down when through a bottle. Fire, then there is a shaking of the Earth, a kind of asteroid fall. That's what they all say, that in the future there will be a certain fiery situation that will destroy oxygen and the Earth's atmosphere, and thereby destroy our civilization again. In other words, these are their predictions, so to speak, in their cosmogony. But, of course, they conveyed a lot of interesting things about the interaction. That is, the transfer of some knowledge, obtaining fire, as possible. Was there something similar to the situation with Sirius? No, they did not describe, as it were, those planets or stars from where these gods came to them. Just from the sky. From where exactly? Well, as if there is no conversation. But we measure, Delicata believes that this is also from there, from the Pleiades. That is, some blue-eyed blondes who give us the opportunity to comprehend their existence and change the course of history, so to speak.
ход истории, так скажем.
Why do people come into contact with some people, namely, open contact with the whole of humanity does not happen? But I, for example, have been thinking about this and why, for example, this happens more often with teenagers. I was just abducted by a child in the city of Sызrань. They just took me, literally, they're up to 300 meters from the house, where I spent the night with my grandparents. Planted on the dam in the fetal position, and in front of me, over the Volga, there literally appeared such a hemisphere, in which there was a beautiful woman with white hair, with such blue eyes. In general, even the whites of the vowels seemed to be of such a bluish color. In light clothes, with a belt with a wide such yarn. Well, the clothes were tight-fitting, like a jumpsuit. I couldn't move, and our communication was telepathic, because I heard that it was like a radio being tuned in my head. And then there was such a clear voice inside my head. I couldn't open my mouth, I couldn't move. At first I was scared, but then she calmed me down a little, and we just had this conversation. Basically, of course, she said that our civilization is going in the wrong direction. If we continue to act like this, then you are not the first ones on this earth, and most likely you will come to your own end, because you do not observe certain laws of the universe, which state that technology should not exceed the development of spirituality. Well, if you don't come to your senses, there will be such a sad end. And how old were you? I was 13. And these guys who were in the Chilca Desert there, the so-called Peruvian contact is written, well, on the internet. There is a lot written about it. Is it documented somehow? That is, it is not only written on the internet. There are people who are still alive, and they hold meetings, take people out to the desert, a certain object arrives. But if earlier they, let's say, went out themselves, contacted, communicated, now it's all happening at the level of telepathic communication. In other words, people enter a meditative state in a certain way and receive information. So anyone can go. Yes, anyone can go. Meet an alien. Yes. Well, I do not know, maybe it is also funded in some way. Well, as far as I know, many correspondents have attended such meetings. There are videos when these objects arrive here. That's what's happening in Canada. In other words, there are certain groups that are engaged in such channeling. Vladimir Dmitry Wiebe, do you have any desire to go? I'm sorry. It's just that I'm coming here with lectures. I've been translating books about aliens. Why contact you? Why don't they get in touch with me? That's just to fly in and say you're a bore. And those who don't believe in anything, here, look, here it is a plate, here they are our tentacles. No, the Chelyabinsk meteorite has arrived to us. More than 200 videos of this event, which allowed, among other things, both the trajectory and the speed to be restored very reliably. All houses, all cars are hung with video cameras. Here is the Chelyabinsk meteorite flew by. There is no doubt that it flew by. Although they also wrote about him, that it was a UFO, or that he was destroyed by a UFO. There are highlights appearing on some videos because the light was bright. They say it's not glare, it's alien rockets that destroyed it, and thereby saved humanity. There's no doubt about it. No one needs to prove that it was. Alien vehicles somehow avoid this detection. That is, they fly, they meet people. Already in some business has blossomed on contacts with them, and nothing. One video is worse than the other. How it turns out, I don't understand either. That is why, with such an abundance of contacts, a variety of contacts, there is zero actual evidence. Well, perhaps they themselves are interested in hiding this information for the public so far. Is it impossible to capture on video? No. Why? There's a lot of good quality. For example, in Turkey, a UFO was filmed over the sea, where even pilots could be seen inside this ship. In other words, there is such a survey, and they have a protection system. That is, visually we cannot see their ships. They can be in the atmosphere here, and we just can't see. But it's a fairly simple technology. I think humanity will be able to create such effects within 10 or 20 years when technology is not visible, and it will simply be visually inaccessible. Well, in general, if there is telepathic contact, why do we need technology at all? That is, you can sit on the Pleiades at home and contact. I understand that. Why come anyway, collect? In addition to the contact group with people, they may be studying the nature of our planet in general. Maybe they have some bases on Earth in which they are constantly present. That is, there is, for example, such a contact friendship in Italy, where it describes that they create underground cavities by such implosion, that is, creating a volume inside the rock. And it does not matter what kind of rock there is, stone, earth, soil, in general, and implosion, it works the other way. But implosion, yes, is like the collapse of an object. Well, an explosion. I do not know exactly how to choose the term right now. Well, that is, they collapse the object, a cavity appears. Yes, that is, they create cavities, yes, inside the rock. But this is how it is described in this contact. They talked there with a group of Italian young people, too, in general, and talked about what interests they pursue on Earth. That is, the study of our tectonics there, the seas and oceans. They are very interested in biology as if underwater. And so, it's nice. And my specialty is geologists. They are similar to people, as it were, as we are to each other. And they are even present sometimes in our society. That is, they can speak any language. One of these very remarkable cases, which we went to investigate this fall, by the way, was the Voronezh incident, when children, playing in the park, in the southern park of Voronezh, suddenly saw that a certain object was sitting down. A work-like creature about 3.5 meters high, and with a head in the form of an inverted bucket, came out from there, of which there are 3 glowing eyes, as they described. Here he was holding something like a cylinder, stuck it in the ground there, apparently took some samples. He had some kind of robot-like square there, too, running on legs. And this is a case that many have seen. And how many people? Well, about 40 people, one of whom was a local guard. Is it clearly fixed that? Yes, it was recorded. It was even Tardas who published this article. But the most interesting thing is that we talked there with an aviation engineer. His name is Igor. I'm not going to call his last name now. He gave the first interview in his entire life there on this event. He was going to work in the morning at the local Voronezh airport, and suddenly in the forest belt he saw that over the clearing there was hanging such a ball, well, like a ball, about 1.5 meters in diameter, of such a silver color. And suddenly out of the bushes there comes out the same work-like creature with 3 of these eyes, and he, as if with his hand, directs or there with his limb here in the direction of this ball. He turns around as if spellbound, and suddenly a monitor appears on the ball, on which he sees events that would have to happen in the future. That is, the Novo-Voronezh end, and there is an explosion, a kind of nuclear explosion. In other words, they showed that an accident is possible at the second power unit. Here he sees this picture, then he falls into some kind of oblivion. When he gets up, there's nothing left. He gets to work, and decided to write about it to local ufologists. It was just that Alexander Masilev received his note that his aliens had warned him that some kind of accident would happen. And Masilev thought that this was some kind of sabotage, wrote to the KGB that there was about to be such a person, who could work there for some special services of other states. And so he sent this information about the explosion. Maybe it's a terrorist attack. Well, this Igor is invited to the KGB. It means that he is telling this event there, that how it all happened to them. He is treated very confidentially. It turns out, because they already had such a witness who came himself, well, some mushroom picker also in the Voronezh region, and to whom the same thing was shown by the same objects. So it's a double coincidence. They sent a request to the Academy of Sciences to check, well, these ones. Reactors. Yes. And indeed, a crack was found there in some kind of cooling system. This reactor was shut down. It's still there. In my opinion, this crude power unit is shut down. And they really prevented, apparently, an accident in this way, which could have infected the entire middle lane. The Chernozem region there, just like the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. In other words, this event, it is quite resonant, so to speak. Well, although little was said about this accident prevention, but they wrote about the events in this southern park. The Japanese, the Americans, the British came there, interviewed these guys, and they told me what they saw. That is, something happened. I'm not saying that these are aliens. Maybe it's some time travelers who gave us such a warning. But this is the actual stuff that really happened. And this Igor, he still works at the local aircraft factory, and he's like such a modest person. Moreover, after this contact, he discovered such a talent for writing poetry. He writes very well. I advised him to publish. He read these poems to us there. So, all this happened in Mosalev's apartment, and we filmed this interview. But 40 people saw in 1989 year, really as they arrived on. Yes. Well, above this place here are the locals who live there in these. We will be able to find some sources. Be patient. Well, I think that if you contact Mosalev, he can dock you with those people who specifically will be. No, well, I mean, is there something we can specify in the description? You can, of course. All links and materials from our guests are in my Telegram channel. Follow the code on the screen or the link in the description and save to your favorites. Well, we continue. I can tell such stories, I don't even know how many. And about UFOs, which were seen by 50 people, I will tell you a story. And I'll tell you a story about how they prevented an accident at the Volga hydroelectric power station. And I will tell you a lot of stories. I don't understand what can be discussed here, what can be argued with here. Stories. And the stories are called factual testimonies. The story is not factual evidence. Again, no specific information, only someone told something. Have you heard about Oumuamua? Yes, I heard. Dmitry Viktorovich, what do you think about Oumuamua, the situation with her? I can't say that I think a lot about her. Well, the asteroid flew into the solar system. Now it's flying away. Have you noticed any oddities behind him, Igor Lvovich? Well, they say it accelerated. In other words, his movement was not unambiguous. But it is possible, as it were, the effect of gravity there. If it is in the solar system, then the sun could affect, for example, its movement. But Musk recently said that supposedly Oumuamua is returning and, moreover, leads with him almost a whole fleet of similar objects, said about it. But this is again information from the internet, and therefore I can't use it. Mask wrote about it. Yes, but they did. The mask. It was written that it was a mask. Maybe. How can you? I don't understand. It was written that this is a mask. Well, Musk publicly. Well, I think that. Let's check it out now. He was writing. You can search and see if he wrote it or not. This is done in 2 clicks. But he is, in any case, very interested in this object. But he has space 10. Why doesn't he try to catch up? We have 3 scientists gathered here. I recently saw a video where they are. Well, there are really enough people, like scientists with high ranks, physicists. They sit in the train compartment and discuss and talk. And they turn to the mask. Certain on a new one. Yes. Certain for sure. Yes, I remember. Not 7 huts. Yes. And so they turned to Musk so that he could create a rocket that could reach the asteroid, and really, that is, they are investigating. Do they notice any oddities behind him? Well, naturally. Since this is such an interest in the scientific community, arose precisely about. But interest in the scientific community arose because it is one of 2 interstellar objects. In other words, this is not some ordinary asteroid that suddenly began to behave strangely. This is an interstellar object, and it is very interesting because it is a sample of matter that came to us from another planetary system. In other words, was he able to develop the 3rd cosmic speed? At home there, to get to us, we have a situation. Naturally, he is interesting. It is remarkable that there are some details in his behavior that we cannot explain yet. But whenever we have an unanswered question, and we say that these are alien technologies, we thereby do not explain anything. We refuse to explain it. That is, that's when we saw some incomprehensible variability in the Tabby star, for example. Yes. And when we say it's alien technology, it's a rejection. Meaning, Dyson's ferry is under construction. This is a refusal to work. In other words, we don't want to work. We don't want to explore this object. These are alien technologies. We don't know anything about aliens except the stories of tribes and students and pawns. The actual information, as we have said many times, is zero. We can fantasize about them all we want. And, of course, it's a wonderful hypothesis that here they arrived in the solar system and something seemed boring and scary to them here. And they pressed the gas pedal, it flew faster than expected. And then what? Here's what to do with this assumption. You can't do anything with it. Because, having said this alien technology, we closed this little book. Well, there are a lot of things that we can't explain yet. Here is the same Tabby star. There are some other phenomena that have no explanation. We need to look for these explanations. We need to work. Yes, we need to create new tools. We need to create new missions. So we will learn something. Sitting at home and fantasizing, we will very easily come to inner harmony. But we will not get any new knowledge at the same time. In other words, the alien hypothesis is a refusal to work. I don't want to work. These are aliens. Leave me alone. I won't do anything. Before I finish, I'm interested to hear your emotions. Igor Lvovich, what was the feeling of the conversation? I understand, as it were, the position of my opponent. A deeply scientific person, a professor, a doctor of sciences, naturally. It is very important for him to have factual material, and he bases all his opinions about nature from an actual point of view. I am very impressed with this. I may also often doubt many things. I want to double-check, but I can't help but trust people who tell, for example, the same thing, who were participants in some events and experienced it all very emotionally. There are indeed a lot of examples of such cases. I could tell you about it too. And about Petrozavodsk phenomena. They're about UFOs over Lake Baikal, where the military pilots themselves, who shot down this UFO, told or their welders who cut this object. My point of view is that we generally live not only in the system of this zoo when we were settled on Earth. Although this is, well, a more acceptable option for me, because with the development of biological life, it is quite difficult to settle consciousness and mind. This is a very small probability. Here, I believe that there is a kind of matrix in general, that is, electromagnetic interaction between different objects, that is, relative to different systems. And the creator, when he created this computer game, he in general took all this into account. And a self-developing system, and the development of intelligence, as it were, of primates, humans, people who are present on Earth. Here, their relationship, here is the concept of the world. It's all fine. And it's even good that people think in completely different categories, because it's more interesting, more, so to speak, not boring. And the creator, watching all this, he can generally feel quite comfortable and happy. Here. And so he would be bored. Imagine there are billions of years, and sitting here in an empty universe, just watching some light bulbs burn, stars. Here. And the creation of mind and consciousness and various civilizations, it still really gives, as it were, a desire to live and create in the future. The same is true of people, as if we have a spark of God, so to speak. We try to create our own worlds, our own worldview, make some discoveries and develop. That's the most important thing. I still hope that in the near future we will receive confirmation that we are not alone in the universe. And it will be much more interesting for us to exist and possibly interact. I hope it will be a positive contact and not some kind of conquest and destruction of humanity. Dmitry Zigfedovich, maybe you can tell us too, share your emotions. How do you like today's arguments from Igor Lvovich? Unfortunately, there were no arguments because there is a real world and there is a fantasy world. The real world is not always comfortable, and therefore it is clear that there is a desire to hide somewhere from it, to think that someone is looking after us, that someone will teach us, that someone is controlling us. This is generally an understandable desire, but it does not find a response in me. because I want to live in the real world as it is. Numerous similar stories, they don't touch me in any way. A story is a story. I'm not really interested in what I can easily do myself. That's when they arrive and come into contact with me personally. That's when I'll be interested. And listening to other people's stories about contact is not interesting to me in the slightest. Excuse me. I am glad that people have completely different opinions on this topic. I hope that there will really be contact, that one of the aliens will shake hands with my opponent, and he, in general, will finally lose his doubts. I'd like to see that. Literally the year before last, we conducted such an experiment, mentally calling the aliens to contact. We had 3 people. And indeed, we saw an object in the form of such a tic-toc tablet, which was approaching us very quickly. It was of such a metallic, mercury-like color. Well, unfortunately, I reached for the phone camera to film it, and at that moment this object disappeared. Maybe he was flying to us for contact, but it came to me that all our thoughts, and as it were, these proclamations, they are still being read by someone. Some kind of intelligence exists above us. Here. And so I, well, became much more confident in my theory of the existence of aliens. I urge people to think positively in this regard, of course, to check the facts, to draw their own conclusions. In other words, critical thinking, it should be present, in general, in any person. Well, I can only join Igor Lvovich's wish to check the facts. That is, when you read something on the internet, you need to understand that the internet is a medium of information. I read it on the internet. I read it on paper. It's the same thing. We need to look at the sources. And if it's written somewhere that Elon Musk said this, don't be lazy. Find where he said it. He probably said it not in the kitchen, but somewhere in an open, accessible space. If you read that a representative of the U.S. Department of Defense admitted something there, do not be lazy. Find where he did it. Because, unfortunately, we have to admit that in some places, sometimes they still write lies on the internet. Don't be lazy. It's not only that it will give you real information, it's also very interesting to understand. Find sources and understand what is really happening. Dear friends, be sure to comment on this video, discuss. It is really interesting to hear some of your opinions about what we discussed today. Does it happen that you look into the comments? Dmitry Zigfrievich, Igor Lvovich, read. I often read. Details. I read the comments. Have you read under our last issue? There was even a comment about Dmitry Wiebe reading the comments. And I wrote under it, yes. And you don't read the comments. I don't read. And you ask me, do I read? I wrote right there that. Me. There's apparently a response to the comments. It's the comments that I read. Not the answers, just need to click on each one. I'm uncomfortable with just the app. Okay, justified. I read. Be sure to write them. Thank you so much for watching this issue to the end. I hope you liked it. It seemed to me that we covered this topic from completely different sides, and were able to delve into it quite well. Also, be sure to go to my Telegram channel. The link will be in the description. There will be a post where you can vote on which of the interlocutors was the most convincing today. Be sure to vote. It will also be interesting to get acquainted. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and expect our next releases. Which of your social networks should I subscribe to? I have a contact group in contact with an alien, and that's what it's called. Can I eavesdrop on your lectures somewhere? I speak wherever I am called, and with the topic that they ask me to voice. In other words, it does not happen that there is some kind of schedule. Guys, monitor the internet. Suddenly, there will be some kind of announcement, perhaps on your contact page, right? Yes, I try to publish announcements there. There are announcements. Unfortunately, the issue has come to an end. I need to say goodbye to you. I would like to thank you again for watching this issue to the end. Thank you all very much. Bye.